Well, welcome back to another episode. This time it's the Volkswagen Touareg. We're going to cover 3 generations because that is all there are currently, although a 4th generation is soon to be on its way for this particular vehicle. There's only one buyer's guide, unfortunately, at the moment, which is the 2nd generation model. The 3rd generation will be coming soon to the channel, but after this, if you're interested in the 2nd generation, you can check out the buyer's guide for that one. The 1st generation will come up too. Before I just sort of go into the depths of all the vehicles that are going to come up, we've got the 7L model, that's the chassis code for the 1st generation, the 7P model, chassis code for the 2nd generation, and the CR model, which is the chassis code for the 3rd generation. But I want to split them. The 1st generation car, it's clearly a vehicle that was inspired by the end of the reign by Ferdinand Piëch. Okay, he's a controversial figure for a variety of reasons. Some people think mastermind and brain of Volkswagen. Some people have less kind views of him. Whatever you may think of him, in his last sort of decade or so with Volkswagen, the cars that were coming out of both of Volkswagen, Audi, some of the other manufacturers within the Volkswagen group, Porsche do sit off to the side, but they obviously have inspiration from the idea of if the top dog is willing to do something, they can push on further with their own ideas as well. And the 1st generation Touareg, I'm not speaking down about the 2nd and 3rd generation, but I am speaking up about the 1st generation. It clearly enters the market with a lot of inspiration by a particular person behind it. Because in this vehicle, we have a 6-litre W12 and a 5-litre V10 diesel. And there is absolutely no business case that anyone could have made. You know, I'm sure many of you who've worked in business have sat at a meeting at some point in your life. And even if you've not worked in businesses, you've worked somewhere where you've had a team meeting and someone has said, why don't we do this? And everyone's looked and said, well, there's no commercial viable way of doing it. That would be a complete loss. And I don't really see the advertising or marketing benefit of it either. That's probably where the conversation would have gone if someone had said, for our first SUV, how about a 5-litre diesel and a 6-litre petrol? Now that would get into the market pretty well. Forget about the 3-litre TDIs and 3.5-litre V6s. Forget about all that for a second. Wouldn't massive engines that cost a lot of money to maintain and buy be how we want the people's car to walk into our non-commercial SUV market? You can't really see that conversation going well, can you? But that is what Volkswagen do, and you can kind of see where the drive is. However, I shouldn't put it all to one person. And we're going to just take the story back a little bit more. I promise we are going to jump straight into the generations in just a second, but it would be remiss sort of just to forget about all the history that goes into the Touareg, because it's actually partly a Porsche sort of effort going on here. Once they realise they want a 4-door car and they don't want to do it by themselves, because prior to this, anything that company wants to do, they don't sort of go walk over to Audi or Volkswagen and say, hey, you know, we're going to need to do this as a joint product, sharing a chassis. It's just not how things are done. Maybe some engine technology, maybe some conversations can happen, but the idea of actually saying, we're going to make a car that on its platform and for some of its engines is going to match, just not a conversation. However, once they realise that they want to go into the SUV game, Volkswagen and Audi both say, we're going to come into this with you. It's something we want to do. And so in this 1st generation, and this is for the 1st and 2nd generation, the partnered vehicles are the Cayenne, the Q7 and the Touareg. In the 3rd generation, I'll get onto that later because I think the chassis under the Touareg goes much further than anyone could have really thought at its very beginnings. But for now, it's just worth sort of introducing this car because in 2002, when this comes out, it is overshadowed slightly. I'm going to be honest. When a car like Porsche is saying, when a manufacturer like Porsche is saying, we're going to come out and we're going to put aside our history of sports cars and the 911 and our very successful release of the Boxster and everything else, we're going to put all that to the side and we're going to go into making SUVs. It was a controversial move and the motoring press sort of really focused in on that vehicle. Instead of saying, the people's car of Germany, Volkswagen, is also going to do an SUV and it's going to be sharing a chassis. And actually, because of the person who's at the helm, it's not like it's going to get second pickings to everything here. It's going to get some serious, serious engines to go with it. And ultimately, I would say if you want an SUV, but you are going to be using it off-road, you know, as we move into the second generation, I think what you'll hear me sort of starting to describe is there is a clear understanding from Volkswagen that people are using these as cars, okay? Using them as actual off-road vehicles to try and compete with someone who, say, buys a Defender, you know, a Land Rover Defender, and actually uses it off-road. That was part of the mindset initially, but they see quite clearly that while some people are towing with these vehicles, and while some people are using them off-road, it is a very, very small number of people. And in fact, the vast majority are saying, I just want a car that's higher up. And so they have to reposition how the Touareg is going to sit in the Volkswagen lineup and the customer that it's going to go to. And that sort of pushes it more over to being, well, an SUV than an off-roader. However, in this first generation, there's clear mechanical aspects to it that really are a little bit overkill if you are just thinking, someone's just going to use this instead of their Golf, for example. Now, I'm going to focus in on the first generation on the two diesels for a second that are the smaller diesels. They have a 2.5 TDI and a 3-litre TDI. The 3-litre TDI on the facelift becomes a clean TDI for the US buyers that are looking at it. Obviously, this is slightly pre some of the legislation that would come in later that would cause issues for Volkswagen. So these are just sort of prior to all that sort of stuff. Ultimately, having driven these, I used to sell quite a lot of these around the 3-4 year old mark when I first went into car sales. I'm sure there'll be 2.5 TDI owners that watch this and think, no, mine's great. You got to do this and you got to do that. On the used market, especially today, I would be looking at a 3-litre TDI. It brings more power to the market, and honestly, 2.5s, whenever I drove them, especially compared to what people would usually be driving them around, which was say like the BMW X5, the Q7, some of the other sort of Range Rover type vehicles or Land Rover type vehicles, the 2.5 always felt like it was just sort of chugging away a little bit harder, and it didn't quite. I don't want to be too unfair to the 2.5, but I just think unless you're going to be buying this vehicle and you're thinking, right, I just need something that is taller, I don't need it to be that new, and I just want it to work, I'd just be looking at a 3-litre TDI from that side of it. Now, the VR6 engine goes into this 3.2 and then as a 3.6. 3.2 VR6s in these, they're actually pretty fun. Not that powerful, 250 horsepower is in this sort of weighted vehicle. It's okay if you can go for a later one and get a 3.6. That sort of moves the game on a little bit more. Not that fuel efficient. Not that great sounding, actually, compared to they do a R36 and an R32. That's for the Golf and for the Passat model, if you got them, either of those. And they sort of keep the sound of this engine. In the Touareg, it's kind of there, but ultimately it's not what the car was about. So Volkswagen engineers do sort of silence it a little bit throughout the exhaust system. You can bring that back out, but honestly, I'd probably do that at the point where the exhaust needs replacing rather just because, unless you're sort of a big sound of getting noise out of your SUVs. Now, with the V8 engine they offered, you have the split will be the facelift, but they actually code them slightly differently and they name them slightly differently. So it's quite easy. If it's a V8 FSI, then it's a later V8 engine, about 345, 350 horsepower. And if it's just V8, 4.2 V8, then it is about 308 horsepower and sort of easier to distinct them. Time-wise, it's about 2003 to 2006 on the earlier one, and then 2006 to the end of production on the later one. The V8 is probably the one that, again, it's difficult with the petrols on these because actually, even in markets where Volkswagen generally wouldn't sell as many diesel vehicles, people still went for the diesel ones. I'm looking sort of America there and even the Middle East, where, to be honest, especially in the Middle East, a diesel is almost completely pointless because you're not trying to save fuel. It's cheap enough as it is. And so why not just have the petrol V8? That's kind of the view most people take. However, when you make an engine that's so convincing to its audience that it's great, and you do offer something proper in the V10 TDI that we'll come on to, it does actually snag away a few of those V8 buyers. But for those of you that sort of are Not interested in the diesels, probably not interested in going up to a 6-litre W12 because of maintenance and everything else. The V8 kind of hits a sweet spot that the VR6, even as a 3.6 in the facelift, 275 horsepower, respectable, but I would probably look over to a V8. Unless there's a maintenance sort of mindset you're going into this with, you have more spark plugs, you have more oil, a bigger engine, everything else going on with a V8, more fuel being used. But a VR6 wouldn't be the first pick of an answer to resolve all those things. If someone's saying cost of a V8 is a lot, it's not like there's a 2.5 4-cylinder turbo or even 6-cylinder turbo or naturally aspirated 3-litre or something that you have as option 2. It's the VR6 engine, which, as I say, has got a great following. I think a lot of the VR6 ones now of the Touareg, because they hit the depreciation curve pretty hard after about 12 years, a lot of people who then wanted parts for the more performance-based VR6 engine cars like the R32 and the R36 Passat did start to look at buying bits off of the Touareg, and actually because the rest of the parts could then be moved into other Touareg models, a lot of those did end up getting broken up and they just hit such a low point in the market. I remember when a customer came in, they had one about 12, 13 years old, and I made an offer to them that I thought was reasonable. It was going to go straight off to auction when I was working in the trade. And actually, in the end, the discussion was the breakers yard would offer them more because of the value of the engine and the parts in it. Not a great way, but you know what? The car had lived its life. It was 14, 15 years through it, and it was going to help a load of other cars stay on the road. And so it kind of made sense from that side of things. Just weren't worth that much at auction. So I think if you're looking for one today, you may find that the V8s give you a little bit more choice, even though less of them were sold brand new. And some of those VR6 ones were possibly got, quite rough and either had an owner that ran them into the ground who's now just trying to get rid of them because the scrap values of them are no longer as good as they were, say, 10 years ago, or they've loved them and they've brought them back up, but they might want a little bit of money for that. And honestly, the diesel is just so convincing it's hard to get away from. But let's just talk about the 6-litre W12 for a second. And there is no getting away from the fact that if you have 450 horsepower in what is essentially 2 V6 engines welded together, you've got something quite unique. And the fact that this was even fitted to any Volkswagen car, I know it really goes in the Phaeton, and that's the car that this is kind of the idea of this sort of goes into, along with sort of some Bentley inspiration and everything else. But really, I think that if you're one of those people out there that you love cars, you don't like a ton of attention, and you're not interested in badges, you really don't want to pull up to your work and someone says, oh, you bought an Audi, a Porsche, a Lamborghini, or whatever. You want to sort of fly a bit under the radar. But when you meet that person at work, at a party that you go to, at some social event, or at a business meeting that you're desperately trying to get out of, and you meet someone that's a fellow car enthusiast, sometimes it is nice to be able to go, hey, I just got an old Volkswagen Touareg, and they go, oh, which one have you got? And you go, oh, I got the 6-litre, and they know what you've bought, and you know what you've got, and it sparks up that sort of car enthusiast conversation that they may not get so quickly into with you if you say you have a 3-litre diesel, because they don't know, are you really into cars, or did you just happen to buy one that was good value? No one out there, I don't think, is accidentally buying a W12. And so, yes, you've got to go into that with your eyes open. The maintenance will be strong, let's put it that way, especially if it's not been very well kept. I did see one of these. I think it had actually been already traded in at one of the other dealers when I was selling cars, and came into me, and it had to go off to auction. And the primary reason it had to go off to auction was it had, value A at auction, value B on retail sale, and the gap between those was not what it needed in maintenance. It needed more like triple that into maintenance, because a lot of owners sort of realised this was going to cost a lot, and that's the point they traded it in. And a lot of garages said, it's not worth me doing the maintenance because there isn't enough profit on top of that to retail the car. So it goes to an auction where it's a flip of a coin. Some people will then try and sell it off of their forecourt with no maintenance and say, well, it's a discount price, and then someone may or may not try and actually do that maintenance. So you can be a bit roll of the dice on these cars. It really depends who you are. If you're someone who's, say, got a YouTube channel and you want to do one of these videos of I bought the worst of XYZ, well, it's just great for that, isn't it? But for if you're just out there and you want a car that's going to be fun to have, but a little bit questionable when it comes to maintenance, and because of that you can get a deal on it. Well, if you can work on your own cars, then the pick though, if you are an enthusiast, is to go for a V10 TDI. They're hard to find, but my goodness, there was no way. I can't imagine how this meeting went at Volkswagen, but especially because of the Cayenne was coming out. And there's a moment of saying, well, we're going to outdo the Cayenne. Okay, they'll have the turbo model at the top end, but we're going to have something that's a 5-litre V10. They're going to be coming in with a 4-litre odd V8 turbo engine. So yes, they'll have a faster vehicle, but our Halo is a 5-litre V10. And you've got to take your mind back 20 years ago. The Halo cars were the big engine car. This is V10 M5 era, V10 RS6 era. This is the time when you put V12s in your 7 Series, your S-Class, and your Audi A8 to sort of, actually the A8 did it get a V12? No, I think it got a V10 and a W12. But you put the big cylinder engines in the flagship. And if you wanted to make sure that you didn't have a car anywhere in the lineup, anywhere near you, that had something more, you certainly wouldn't go in and say, well, let's add 2 cylinders and then let's make it our R model, because there is an R50 V10 TDI. As I say, I don't know how that conversation went. I don't think if it was the era or any other era that this could have happened, because you see it now, for example, that the latest Touareg with an R version, it certainly doesn't go stepping up towards the Lamborghini model or the top Bentley model or anything like that. It's here in the range, and if you want to go up from that, you move to the next manufacturer up. Volkswagen, no, we're doing a V10 TDI. So that's 309 horsepower and 345 horsepower, 345 if you go for the later R50 model. But honestly, horsepower is not the conversation with these engines. 750 foot-pound of torque or 850 foot-pound of torque. Yeah, you're going to be moving a train with that. And I think there is video online. If I can find it, it's now quite difficult to get hold of. I'm not sure what the VW press team did it, but if I can find it, I'll put it up here now, which is the Touareg pulling a plane. And I'm pretty sure they did that with the V10 TDI, but they might have used a different engine, but I'll double check. It's something that's only happening once. The only real downside, I would say, on this first generation is that it's just before we move into the 8-speed gearboxes. So although those 6 speeds are fairly tough, the 8-speed, if you're coming out of something now, if you've been driving cars, say 2017, 18, 19, 20 and onwards, moving back to say a 6-speed auto with these sort of larger engines, there's a real notable difference in technology at the time. That's quite charming in some ways, but it's a compromise. And I know some people will say, oh, well, it's better than the new stuff breaks, blah, blah, blah. Nah, I think there's always an element of someone that likes the way things used to be done and doesn't like the way things are currently done. But the person saying that will meet someone that says, well, you should have been seeing how cars were built in the 50s and then the 60s and then the 70s, and they'll think those are better. And then you'll meet someone who's maybe a little bit older, who was an engineer during those times, and they say they're all rubbish, the best stuff is built today, because they deal with CAD design, they do non-destructive testing, and they see material strength and everything else. However, that's a never-ending debate. And I think just the interesting thing here is you will still feel like you've stepped a little bit back in technology, but you won't feel like you've stepped all the way back to the 70s and 80s. So yeah, let's move on to the second generation. And so we move from the PL71 platform to the PL72 platform. And I'm just going to jump ahead a little bit in the engines to say, in this generation 4, some of you watching, you get the 4.2 V8 TDI engine. Now, it's not a V10. V10's gone. But that 4.2 TDI engine is from the Volkswagen Group where I think it goes into several Audis as well. And in the Audi buyer guides that I've done for it, I had to spend a bit of time double checking this. In the Audi buyer guides, I do mention there's a marine application to this engine. Okay, it goes into the Touareg as well, and it's derived the same as the Audi version. It's derived from the marine engine. Marine engines go through a completely different set of testing. They have to sit essentially all day long at a set number of revs with a set delivery of torque because they're moving a boat. To put them into a car, it's like having, moon level spaceship testing done on a plane that only ever flies short distances. It's just way beyond what you'd need to do for a car. And so this is that's a particularly robust engine. It runs from 2010 to 2018, not in all markets, but that 4.2 V8 TDI. A lot of people like the 3 litres, and I can see why, but I have to sort of just pull it out of the range and say, if you're looking for one, if you're able to buy a TDI, because we're still in Euro 5, I think it's China 5, and I can't remember what the US emissions rules are at this time, but these early ones are that they don't sort of pass into the later Euro guidelines, so they can't go into a lot of cities, or they get fined for doing so, or you have to pay a fee for doing so in some parts of Europe. So I just want to bring that up, because Europe will be really where these 4.2 TDIs sold well. I think the Aussie's got the 4.2 TDI. And yeah, if you're going to use one anywhere in Australia and you need it to sort of run and run and run, that's your pick. Probably definitely over the 3 litre TDI. That's not, again, speak down about the 3 litre TDI. It's just to speak up about the V8. Now, should we do petrol? No, I'll do petrol engines last. There's the 3 litre TDI. I think by far and away that'll again be the pick for the Touareg. When I was selling these, so they get rid of the 2.5. I should just add actually a quick note. These are 8-speed automatic gearboxes. The previous generation, there are 2 engines, I think, that get a manual. I think it's a 2.5. Maybe the 3 litre diesels as well get manual gearboxes. Very, very rare to find, but if you want a manual, that's the generation you have to look on. I'm pretty sure they've completely cleared them out and they go 8-speed on this second generation. There are more details in the buyer's guide for the second generation, which you can check out after this if you want. But the 3 litre TDI becomes dominant across pretty much all its markets. Okay, so it goes into Europe, it goes into the US. This is pre-Dieselgate times for Volkswagen, and they are really pushing the idea of clean diesel technology, high MPG. This is that engine. Okay, the big advantage, especially if you're in Europe, is it's ubiquitous. You could have a 3 litre TDI and you could go from north to south of Europe, east to west of Europe, run it into any garage, and they've seen a 3 litre TDI before, and they know somewhere where they can get parts for them, and they can probably do the job in the book time or less because they've got so used to seeing them. They're a common engine, and for that reason they can be really good. And it's not just about maintaining them. Performance-wise, okay, so the engines move over to, the petrols move over to a 3.6 V6 and a 3 litre engine. I'll come on to those in a minute. They retain a V8. Honestly, the 3 litre TDI, unless you're going to the V8, it performs, I'm not going to say outperforms because it depends really what you're using your car for, but for the majority of people looking for an SUV, that 3 litre TDI will do more than enough in the majority of circumstances you're going to be in, rather than having a V6 petrol or the other 3 litre V6 engine. It's just what it does. Particularly with its torque delivery, especially as I know these, more so than the Q7 and the Cayenne, these do tend to get picked by people who are looking for something that does the job, isn't showy about it, can tow and doesn't look, most people who think of a Cayenne towing will think, oh, it's a guy towing his 911 to the track on his Cayenne. That's kind of like the picture advert for what they would use. With a Touareg, it's a man or a woman towing their trailer or their caravan out to some rugged bit of landscape. That's kind of, and I think they capture their market really, really well there, but they're all using the 3 litre TDI. Okay, so for the majority of you, the 3 litre TDI will be the pick. It's good horsepower as well, so it's I've never driven a second generation particularly. Now the 8-speed gearbox is a help here, so I should sort of differentiate it. In the earlier generation, it's paired with a 6-speed on the first generation, and it's good compared to the competitors at the time that are also using either 5 or 6-speed automatic gearboxes. Here with an 8-speed, efficiency is boosted, especially if you're doing a lot of highway, higher speed driving, but also the way it's able to get power down because it can just shuffle through those gears, get it exactly in the sweet spot for torque and go. With the speed of the gearbox, it's notable. Like having driven them, one of them feels more like, the first generation feels more like an SUV of its or a 4x4 of the time. This step change is you feel more like you're moving like a car but bigger, is the best way to put it. And that kind of reflects what Volkswagen were trying to do. The first one, bit of an open idea of what we're going to do here. We're trying to chase down markets. The only real established markets here are sort of Jeep and Land Rover. If you go pre-2000s, Mercedes had the ML in the mid-90s, but there really isn't a lot over in that side that isn't just a 4x4. The US manufacturers coming in with SUVs are sort of truck-based, and so Volkswagen sort of hedged their bets a bit on the first generation and then clarified what they were going to do on the second generation. Now on the petrol engines, there's quite a bit of carrying over going on because some markets are not ready to transition, or they're not picking up diesel, or while they want to move to a hybrid in some markets, they don't want to do it in others. So the VR6 engine carries over from the earlier model. The V6, it's a V6 now. 3.6 V6 goes in, FSI engine. That carries about 276 horsepower. The V8, carries over. So the petrol V8 carries over from the previous generation into this generation for a select number of markets. And a 3-litre turbo is offered in China without hybrid assistance and a couple of other select markets. But by far and away, the one that the 3-litre turbo is paired with the most is a hybrid system, and that goes in the majority of markets. So there's like a bit of skinnying down of the petrol side. They've seen the 3-litre TDI is just dominating throughout. Most of you watching this will either have a 3-litre TDI, be looking for a 3-litre TDI, or have only ever really seen a 3-litre TDI. They just, took over in this generation. And actually, if you're looking for a V8 petrol, a hybrid petrol, or the 4.2 V8 TDI, you've got an uphill battle because there's just so few of them sold. That 3-litre TDI could do no wrong, sort of thing, on the Touareg. So just something to bear in mind there. The hybrid model is a combined 375 brake horsepower. It runs until about 2014, then it gets replaced for a facelift model. Honestly, if you don't want a diesel, it would be the one I would probably say, yeah, you'll probably find a few of these. The difficulty is, in these years, it was hard to convince people to go to hybrid when most of the time it was only delivering the average fuel economy of the diesel. And the diesel, as I said, it could do no wrong. This is all pre-Volkswagen scandal. It's all pre sort of the time when people had a sort of down view. And it's a time when a lot of governments around the world were incentivizing diesel purchases because they had lower CO2s, and that's what they were targeting for buyers on the used market. So, on the new car market, and for leasing companies and everything else. So, yes, I don't have anything against it. Supercharged, I think I mentioned it. I think I might have said it was turbocharged, but no, it's a supercharged engine. I just would sort of say its application here, if you're looking at towing, if you're looking to buy one with the most choice, it's going to be a 3-litre TDI, and there's no real getting away from that. However, I do include all the options of engines in the buyer's guide, so if you want to check out the second generation, you can check out the buyer's guide next. However, let's go to the third generation, the CR model. Now, this generation, the reason this, as I was researching this, I had to smile, and it made me sort of just chuckle to myself a little bit, because I know how this car arrived. I know the moment that it was, and I know what Volkswagen must have been thinking. They'd put all their eggs in one basket on diesel technology for the Touareg. Dieselgate was just starting to kick off. 2 years into the production of this, we're going to global lockdowns. Everyone starts talking about EVs, and you can see it in the sales figures. When the second generation launches, first generation, it's a good increase for Volkswagen. It's a success. They're happy. Second generation, it nearly doubles. Like the pickup of that second generation model from the market that was looking for a sort of SUV size vehicle. You can see the drop off in sort of saloons and estates across the world, but Volkswagen aren't unhappy about that because people are actually choosing to buy their more expensive SUV with lots of optional extras, and they're picking the 3-litre TDI. It was just this wave. And then 2017, 18, 19 happened. When you've attached so much a model to a diesel engine, and then the actual powertrain itself becomes the ire of media, and everyone wants to attack it. Obviously, it was going to have a hit on sales, and it does hit sales. And what's funny for me is I've had several conversations, I think I've brought it up in several videos, that the market shifted and then quickly shifted back. Okay, if you look today, there is almost no incentivization for people to buy diesel engine vehicles. Almost none. Okay, in fact, there is more punishment for taxation and lesser benefits attached to a diesel engine than any other powertrain out there. And yet, after we've had the sort of big push for electrification, hybridization, the new car market from the personal purchase. Okay, so we'll forget about lease companies for a moment. They've had to go hybrid in most countries, but that's where the incentives are. If it's not fully electric, the person going into the dealer, they've gone back to diesel. And it tells a great story in the Touareg of this sort of, the sales drop off, they bring in the hybrid model, sales sort of steady out, and then off it goes again with diesel sales. Now, is it like before? No, because there just isn't the leasing, the deals that they can do anymore, and they have moved the Touareg up the chain, I'd say, price-wise. But then we live in a world where Volkswagen Golfs, for example, are about a third to 2/3 more expensive than they were just 10, 12 years ago. In fact, 10 years ago. 10 years ago to now, I'd say a Golf is about 2/3 more expensive. It's not doubled in price, but it's getting there. And they've done that by deleting some of the lower end range for some countries. They have added in a lot of stuff that they've had to, like safety tech. But the point to that is that then you have the similar thing happening up the range, because if you've got to increase your base car price and you've taken away all your small cars, then the only way to go is up from there. So you get simplification of engines. It's a 2-litre petrol 4-cylinder. That is the EA 888 turbo petrol 4-cylinder engine. It's just ubiquitous throughout the Volkswagen group. Skoda, Cupra, Seat, Volkswagen, Audi, Porsche use it actually as well in the Macan. I don't think, no, that's it. Might be forgetting one, but yeah. So it's ubiquitous, and it goes throughout the ranges. We're talking there's R models with it, GTI models with it, and then fairly sort of run-of-the-mill, regular models that run around with that 2-litre engine as well. Goes into the Touareg, not a big seller. I would say if you're just buying this as an SUV, and maybe this is a car that you're looking at buying for someone else, because I think anyone who's going online, looking at a video like this, watching it and thinking, okay, I'm really considering between generations, is probably a little bit more car enthusiast than they are sort of just buyer who wants the best possible car and doesn't really care too much about the powertrain. But if you're this person looking for this person, I'd actually have a look at the 2-litre petrol if you can. The turbocharging does enough to fill the torque gap. Yes, this is a heavy car, but to be honest, it's not like it's 3 tons or something of the electric, or some of the plug-in hybrids today are coming out at 2.5 tons plus. And when you get to SUVs, you're going up to 2.7, 2.8, 2.9 tons. So it's not heavy like that. And with this smaller 4-cylinder engine, it's not going to feel quick, but it's not going to leave you sort of feeling like you're always trying to keep up with the traffic. The pick, it's funny to say this. So you have a 3-litre hybrid model, which is plug-in hybrid, the usual sort of, you almost don't need to know the figures to know the figures. It's very similar to a lot of vehicles, about 30 miles, 50 kilometers of plug-in range, roughly, depending on the seasons, depending on where you're driving, at what speed you're driving, etc., etc. Good, reliable 3-litre engine. It's quite ubiquitous, that petrol 3-litre engine, proving itself. Has 1 or 2 known issues that I've brought up in Audi guides, but only really on the early models, so 2018, 2019, and not particularly attached to the hybrid model. Okay, so that makes a good argument for itself. But the one that makes the best argument for itself is the 3-litre TDI. And it's just so weird because this is a car that has been sort of vilified. It was, if you bought a 3-litre TDI, you know, if you were walking into a Volkswagen dealership and said, hi, I'm not going to tell you the model I'm looking for, but I can tell you I'm looking for a 3-litre TDI. If I was selling them, I would sort of say, okay, so you're looking for either a Touareg or you're looking for one of our bigger estate cars, maybe. I mean, no, I'd probably just almost like straight to the SUV and Touareg. That's kind of just, it was the poster child. And for it to then, you know, be pulled away in the market and disappear a little bit because it was so attached to it. And then as the market is saying, you know what, if you're going to take away diesel engines from me that are doing, you know, in this sort of car, 40 miles to the gallon, sometimes plus on a run, and you want to tow, and you don't want to be worrying about batteries and degradation and everything else and charging, and in 10 or 12 years you want it to have strong residuals, the hilarious thing is that instead of people saying, no, the new tech is the way to go, they're looking and saying, while I can, I'm going to buy the 3-litre TDI. It's just a funny position to be in. It's a bit of a shame in some ways because ultimately, if we look at the last 125, 130, 140 years of the automotive world, generally what comes in the decade after the last decade is better and people don't go backwards. And from, you know, to 1900 to 1980, if you could buy a newer car, you just did. Of course, there's always been an idea of a classic, but if you wanted something to commute around in, you just did. And the fact that hybrids and plug-in hybrids really is something of the 2005, 2010 world afterwards. Diesels really are 2000, 90s into 2000. That's when they're really maturing and becoming mainstream. And 20 years on, we're sort of saying, actually, they were really, really good at doing what they're doing. And now you've got all the DPF emissions stuff under control. New diesel engines actually are achieving what they claim. I can see what the market's done. It's gone, yeah, but I just want something that's going to do the job. And you know what? It is low CO2. We know it has higher emissions in other areas, but people will argue online until the cows come home and then go back out to the field and then come home again about all different types of emissions that we have in this world and total life emissions of a vehicle and everything else. I'm not here to do that. I am here, though, to point out that you have to choose what you're going to do with your money. And the whole time I was studying economics, it was always told to us that the market will decide. You can put in laws and legislations and regulations all you want, but ultimately the market will decide. And this is where you come to sort of a tipping point. The market is making a small but notable move to say, actually, while I can get things like the 3-litre TDI, I'm going to. Now, some of you get the 4-litre V8 TDI. I think really the only reason to step into that is if you are doing a lot of towing, you're someone who's sort of had faster vehicles previously, and for whatever reason you want to get something that's maybe a little bit under the radar, and is just a nice, expensive vehicle, but people aren't going to pick you out in a crowd. I know some of you may be Volvo XC90 owners and feel very much like that because Volvo XC90s are more expensive brand new than most people would ever guess. And yet they have a huge audience for them because people can get a very nice vehicle that a lot of people don't have a very strong opinion on one way or another. And I think the Touareg is very much like that. Volkswagen badge on the front. Yes, it's an SUV. It's not, it doesn't have a Porsche badge on it. And this chassis, this is where it splits to become a Bentley, a Lamborghini, a Porsche, and an Audi. So of the 5 variations of this chassis that go on the CR model, the Volkswagen is the one where you could get yourself, say, a 4-litre TDI, drive around for the next 300,000 miles or 500,000 kilometres, just put fuel in it, not worry about anything else, but as long as your fuel station has got diesel, then you'll carry on going. The 3-litre, though, it makes a more compelling argument for me because you're not paying the price premium of the V8, and you're not having the fuel penalty of doing so. But I can absolutely understand why someone would say, actually, the V8's available to me. I'm going to go for that one. Brand new now, I think almost all markets have had the V8 taken away though. So just an FYI, if you're looking 2023, 4, 5, you probably just don't have a V8 at all. And I'm going to round out this video by talking about the Touareg R. Okay, so this is a hybrid model. It comes out in 2020. I will just quickly note that in 2023 there is a facelift for the Touareg. So if you've seen slightly different looking models, it's 2023 onwards. There's the facelift. That, for almost all of you, knocks out the V8 diesel, keeps you the V6 diesel in some markets, but for others, you didn't even have a V6 diesel to begin with. And for some, the facelift was where they pulled it out because they'd had such poor sales. For many of you, the hybrid is around, and this R model, which comes out in 2020, 450 horsepower. And again, if you're that person I described earlier, you're interested in cars. You just don't want any attention at all. You want to be able to drive around, and only really someone who was truly a car enthusiast is going to be able to say, oh, that's something a bit special. The fact they even do an R model is quite interesting to me, because it really, there's a little bit of inspiration coming all the way back to that first generation saying, oh, let's stick a W12 in there. There's no one wants it, but we'll find, I mean, as in, no, there's no customer we can just identify. People will buy it, but not in the numbers that we'd need to even cover our cost of developing that. No, but let's just punt it out anyway. We'll stick a V10 TDI while we go as well. That's a little bit of the mindset behind the R model. I had a quick look on the classifieds before I made this video, and I think in the UK there's about 45 for sale used. In the US, obviously, it was more difficult to do a full countrywide search, but again, rare. So it's 450 horsepower. It has a 3-litre engine attached to a plug-in hybrid system. It has the R badges on it, but if you get them in black, to be honest, looking at one of those, looking at an R-line model of the diesel, you got to know your cars, and because of that, I think that's really quite nice and quite special. And to be honest, let's say if you're that person that says, maybe you've had an XC90 and you think, I'd just like something a little bit more, something about it, but I don't want to go and be shouting to the world of, hey, I've bought this, because whatever the reason may be. You go and knock on the door of Volkswagen and say, hey, have you got any R Touaregs? I would bet that there'll be dealerships out there that have just never ever seen one. They probably have it. They did their product training, 6 years? Yeah, 6 years ago, they would have had their product training. And someone would have said, oh, next year there's going to be an R model. And then they're going, oh, yeah, right, okay. They just thought, I'll never see one. What's the point? I remember when I worked at Mazda, and they showed us a couple of concepts of what was going to come out in the next few years. And we all did exactly the same thing. Oh, yeah, all right. Thinking, oh, they'll never make those. And then we got sort of the later Mazda 6. And a few of the SUVs, and we thought, they are pretty much exactly like the concept. We didn't see that happening. So, yeah. Anyway, the R model, that would be the pick of the later generation if you are after something that's that bit special. Otherwise, 3-litre TDI. Second generation, 3-litre TDI. It's just too easy to do that. I would only say, I think in the last year of production, just be a little bit wary. I think there is a big recall across these anyway, but Volkswagen's production is affected as sort of news stories come out, and so you may just see a sort of drop off in that late year, and that might restrict the amount of choice that you have. So just something to bear in mind if you're looking at buying. First generation, honestly now, if I could find the V10 TDI or the W12, so I would be like, well, you're not going to get them again, are you? It's as simple as that. For everyone else, the 3-litre diesel is the answer, okay? But those are not going to be, well, they were never replicated. They were never done again. They're not going to be repeated. And I think we live in a world now where if Volkswagen ever said, we're going to do a V10 TDI or a W12 or any sort of big, exciting engine in a car, it would be like, 4 times, 5 times, 6 times the price of the normal one, and they'd make 10 of them. That I don't blame Volkswagen for. In almost all markets, they're now targeted by average CO2. I'm not making an excuse for them here, by the way. I just want to, in case you don't know this, manufacturers are targeted by average CO2, and they have to buy credits if they go above that CO2. That's what Tesla made so much money with, by the way. they were able to sell their credits because they average 0 and they are allowed to have a certain amount of CO2. And so the difference is the credit, and they can sell the credits to other manufacturers. Manufacturers don't want to do that. They don't want to be spending money to sell cars. Like as in, they've got to spend the money to develop them in the first place. They don't want to then pay someone else as sort of a way to even sell the car that they made. I can kind of get that. And so when they do anything special now, the only way to do it is say, well, we can get our development costs back if we charge an extraordinary amount of money. And if we make 15 of them, the average CO2 won't pull it up. And also, we just don't live in that world anymore where one person sits in a boardroom and says, I know we'll make a big loss and I don't care. We're doing it. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, consider subscribing. There is a page on the website now if you're interested in buying a car. There's a free PDF on that page. We'll give you a few tips if you're looking at buying a used car. There's also some products on there. The miles driven does get a small commission if you buy any of those products, which is great. It helps us out, helps us with studio equipment and everything else in trying to make these videos. The next one of these, not quite sure what I'm going to do yet. I'm going into sort of a long research period, which is coming just to an end for an extended guide of one of the cars we've done before. But don't worry, we'll keep the uploads coming, and I hope to see you next time.